most of the time. However, today the main memory is a lot more, the size is a lot larger. Okay, so the memory size is a secondary concern. So we want more convenience, okay, in the program's implementation. So that's why in today's either the C++ STL for the standard library for the linked list implementations or the Java linked list class, we use the W linked list. Now in a W linked list, every node has two pointers, back and next. That every node will have a pointer points to his predecessor, as well as a pointer that points to his successor. Okay. Now, when you have a W-linked structure, to perform insertion or deletion, your traversal, this traversal, you don't need to keep two pointer variables. One pointer variable will be sufficient because from that node you can always find out who is his predecessor. And if you need to do something with the insertion after the current node, you know what is his successor. Next, we'll see a few examples for some program codes that manipulate a W linked list. Now this will be the diagrams, showing the structure of a W linked list. Now in this example, the data structures maintain two external reference, first and last. Okay, that points to the first node in the W linked list and the last node in the W linked list. Now, the back pointer of the first node is a null value. The next pointer in the last node is a null value. Okay, because there's nothing follow the last node and there's nothing before the first node. Now if you want to insert a new node, a new element, after a current node in a W linked list, then it will be, the statement will be, steps will be like this. Now when you write your programs to manipulate a linked list, my advice to you is that as beginner, you better draw a diagram using paper and pen to help you to figure out what are the necessary steps. Now in this case, what we want to do is to insert a new value after the current node. So it means that we want to put the node P, in between, these two. Now suppose this is A and B and we have a new value S. Now after the insertion, what we want to achieve, the node structure will be A, X, and then B. So this will be the new structure of the linked list, okay, that we want to obtain. And this is the initial, okay, structure of the linked list. Now the first step is to create a node. Okay, no, so we create a node by using the new operator. Then we put the value x into the node. Okay. Now, before you modify the existing pointers, okay, of the linked list, first you set up, okay, the length of the new node. Okay. Now, if P is supposed to be inserted after the current node, okay, then it means that after the insertion, the successor of P will be the successor of current. Okay, so the first step is to set the successor of P points to the successor of current. Okay, and after the insertion, current will be the predecessor of P, because P is expected to be placed after current. Okay, so the back pointer of P, okay, will be set to current. Okay. Now after you have set the length of the new node, then you will start to modify, okay, the existing pointers in your linked list. So the first things to check is if current has a successor. Okay. So if current has a successor, okay, so this node exists. Okay. Then it means that after the insertion, this pointer will be changed, because after insertion, x will be put in front of b. So this back pointer will be changed to point to p. Okay. Now, the statement, now you start to see two levels of indirection. And the way to pronounce this part, we do the pronunciation from right to left. We set the back pointer of the successor of current. Okay, now the back pointer of the successor of current to P. Now when you visualize, okay, the effect will be, now you start from current, follow the next pointer, then you find the back pointer. Okay, so this is the back pointer of the successor of current. Okay, so this will be this variable. Set it to P. Okay, now this pointer is now pointing to P. Now if the current node does not have a successor, then you don't need to do these steps. Okay, because it will be the last node. There's no successor. And if current does not have a successor, then it means that after the insertion, okay, the value of last will be changed, because the new node will become the last node. Okay, so if current does not have a successor, okay, then the value of last will be changed to P. Now P will become the last node after the insertion. Okay, so we have two cases. Depends on whether current has a successor. Now you have, okay, modified the right hand side part of the linked list. Okay, so the next thing is to change the next pointer of current, because after the insertion, x will be the successor of A. Okay, B is no longer the successor of A. Okay, then the final step is to change this pointer to set it to point to P. Okay, so the next pointer of A, that is current, the next pointer of current is changed to point to P. Now for the insertion, it is okay. The steps. Okay, it is clear to you. Yeah.
Do we need to specify about the instruction about like the P, whether it is pointing to the forward or the backward?
Now you have two pointers in the note, next and back. The pointer next points to the successor, back points to the predecessor. So this is the setup.
But we didn't mention anything about P when we are pointing from B or A towards the P, whether it's
now because the insertion, okay, is to insert after the current note. That is what we want to do.
One question. When was the last pointer or variable been defined? Yes, this one.
Now, because in our setup of the program, we maintained a W-linked list, and we reference this W-linked list by two pointer variables, first and last. Okay, because very often in a applications using W-linked list, we want to do some operations at the front as well as at the end of the linked list. So if you only reference one pointer, for example, first, if we want to do something at the other end, we need to do a traversal. So it takes time. Okay, so there's a trade-off. Okay, so that's why in the program we maintained, in this example, we maintained two external reference. Now, when you maintain two external reference, every time you update the linked list, you need to also update these two reference accordingly. Now, when you are doing an insertion, that you add something after the current node. When you add something after the current node, okay, it means that wherever you insert, you will not modify it. Okay, who is the first one? Because you are inserting after. Okay, so if when you do the insertion, if the current node is currently the last node, so after the insertion, you have a new node that is the last node. Okay, so this is represented by the case whether your current node originally has a successor or it does not have a successor. Okay, so if it does not have a successor, then it means that after the insertion, X will be the new last node. Then you need to update last. If the current node originally has a successor, then your insertion will be done at the middle, somewhere in the middle of the linked list, and it will not affect who is the last one. Then you don't need to update the variable last. Okay. Now you see that in the program codes for insertion, it's unlike the case that for a single linked list with one pointers per node. We don't need to traverse the list with two pointers variables. Okay, we can traverse the list with one pointer variables. And we can also do the traversal in forward direction or backward direction. So we can traverse the list from left to right or right to left. Okay? Now, the next example is to remove a current node P. Now you traverse the linked list. Okay, and you are using the pointer P that points to the node that you want to remove. Okay, now in this case, we don't need to have a separate variables that tell us who is the predecessor of P, because we can always find out his predecessor through the back pointer Okay, so we don't need two separate variables in our program's loop control. Okay. Now, if we want to remove, okay, a node P from a W linked list. Okay. Now, to remove that node, okay, first we consider if it has a successor. Okay, if it has a successor. Okay. So if it has a successor, then what we need to do? We need to modify the back pointer of its successor, because after the removal of P, the predecessor of his successor will need to bypass P and point to the predecessor of P. Okay, so we need to modify this pointer. Okay, so if P has a successor, then the back pointer of the successor of P will be changed to the predecessor of P. So we change this length. Okay? The other case, P is the last node, so P does not have a successor. If P does not have a successor, okay, then it means that after the removal of P, the identity of the last node will change. Now you are deleting the last node. So after the deletion of the last node, the value of last will be updated. Then what is its new value? Now if you are deleting the last node, then the predecessor of P will be the last node. Okay? Now after you change the value of last, okay, then you have to once again check if that node exists. Okay, meaning that you are not deleting the only node in your linked list. Now, after the deletion of P, you have a new last node. Then the next pointer of the last node must be equals to null. Okay, so if the new value of last is not a null pointer, then you need to terminate the linked list. Okay, so the next pointer of last should be null. Okay? Now, here you take care of the right hand side, okay, of the linked list. Then we consider the left hand side of node P. Okay, the logic will be the same. If P has a predecessor, so P has a predecessor. If P has a predecessor, then after the removal of P, the next pointer of his predecessor should be pointing to his successor. Okay. So the next pointer of the predecessor of P is changed to point to the successor of P. Now, if P does not have a predecessor, then it means that P is the first node. It means that you are deleting the first node. If you delete the first node, then the new value of first will be the next of P. Okay. So once again, you check if after the deletion, do you still have something in the nodes, in the linked list? If first is not a null pointer, then you need to set the back pointer of the first node to null. Okay. Now, after you have updated all the pointers in the linked list, then you can physically delete the node P. Clear? Now, the important point is that whenever you write your codes to manipulate lengthness as beginners, if you can't visualize, the computations, in your mind, use some paper and pen, draw some diagrams to help you to figure out what you need to do. Because if you make a mistake in one of the steps, then your lengthness setup is corrupted. Then in later steps, when you use the lengthness for other operations, you will encounter problems. And very often, your program will simply crash. And then you don't know what to do. Why it crashed. So it takes a lot of time to debug. So in order to avoid that painful debugging process, use the paper to help you to do the planning. Now for W lengthness, we finished that in a couple of minutes. For W lengthness, we also have a few variants. We can have a W lengthness with a header, or we can also have a circular W lengthness. So if you have a circular W lengthness, then you don't need to maintain the first and last pointer. You only need one pointer, because the back pointer of the first node will point to the last node, and the next pointer of the last node will point back to the first node. Now, one exception for writing a loop to process a circular list, your loop termination will not be based on P equals null. Or as long as P is not null, you continue your looping. Now, when you are dealing with a circular list, you always go around and around, and the loop won't stop. Now, the normal practice is that you have an external pointer that points to a particular node. You do the traversal of the lengthness with another pointer variable. You do the looping as long as you have not come back to your starting point. If you go through one loop and come back to your starting point, you stop. Otherwise, you repeat, and repeat, non-stop. Now you can have a lengthness with a header, you can have a circular lengthness, you can also have a circular lengthness with header. So this will be the structure of the lengthness. Any other questions?